So what I was thinking, like, number one, like, I've always dreamed of doing this with you. I don't know if you remember, but like 5 or 6 years ago, maybe, I couldn't afford their apprentice coach program. And I emailed one of your staff and they were like, yeah, if you just stand on the fence, like all the way on the other side and you could just watch. So I drove out from California to Arizona and I just like stood on the fence with a notebook and just watched everything. And it was like eye opening for me. In that time, like I probably wasn't making more than $10 a week coaching. Like it wasn't anything, but
Why didn't you walk up and tell me? I'd have let you.
I feel like I did towards the end. Like I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna go up because you were going over rudiment,
Yeah.
and I wanted to see it. I couldn't see from where like the angle that I was at, so I went up there and I started to listen. I was writing it down, but I mean that one experience like shifted my whole life as a coach. Made me realize like this is something I wanted to really do.
Mhm.
Um, at the time I was finishing up playing. I had like a really average rugby career, and I was just kind of like bouncing around the development side, but I was never gonna make the top side.
Yeah.
And I was trying to decide if I wanted to coach, but when I saw you coach, I'm like, man, like that's the passion that I want to have when I'm coaching. Like that's the type of communication, that's the type of conciseness I want to have, even though there's like this mountain of knowledge. When it comes out, it's two things. And that's what I was really attracted to, and that's kind of led me down the rabbit hole. Just after that, I went to Jonas. I had $1,000 in my bank account. It took me 800 to fly to England, and then I had 200 to get a hotel, transportation to Jonas, and somehow bought an extra genie. Like I was just like bouncing around, but I got to Jonas, learned a lot from Jonas, and then through Stu, I've learned a ton. So this has always been a dream of mine to like talk to you directly. Um,
Well,
I appreciate it.
anytime, just reach out. Hey, one heads up, I'm babysitting my granddaughter today, so I may have to stop if something happens.
No worries. Yeah, no worries. My daughter might make an appearance in here too. She wakes up. So no worries. How old is your granddaughter? Or
She she's 9 going on 13.
My daughter is 8 weeks going on 10 years. Yeah.
They're life changing, but it's great to have a daughter for sure.
Yeah. How many kids do you have?
I have a daughter that's 36, a son that's 33, and then we have the 9-year-old granddaughter on one side and a 3-year-old grandson on the other.
Oh, okay. Love it. Love it. Awesome.
So we
Awesome.
got bookends at the child level and grandchild level.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, I really only had like, I mean, I have like 100 questions, but when it came down to it, like, I didn't want it to be like a podcast or anything. I kind of wanted to just be like conversation and ask the questions that I really wanted to know. Like, I mean, truthfully, these are just like, I wonder what Dan would say on this. So they're pretty basic though. So the first one was, who was the most impactful in your coaching career? Because for me, you, Jonas, and Stu were the three most impactful. Who would you say yours were the most impactful for you, and like why, and would they help you learn?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'll preface, I'm not a guy that ranks things like your favorite band or favorite music or favorite place to visit. I have a lot of favorites for a lot of reasons. So, most impactful coach, I would say, first of all, was my high school track coach. He was a guidance counselor who was a distance runner but loved the sport. And so he kind of introduced the sport to us the right way.
Mm-hmm.
My high school football coach, this is in the 60s, and he was the first, quote, hippie style coach I ever had.
Nice.
So he let us have water breaks and music in the locker room. And we had a team leadership committee where we could bring problems to him and whatnot. And this was unheard of in the 60s because it was all military, top down, yes sir, no sir, train till you die kind of stuff. So I was like, wow, you can kind of be a humanist and be a coach. So those were the first two landmark hits. I'd say my father, although he coached me in baseball and little league, but he was a farmer, and he was a builder, a general contractor. And so I think he coached me in a lot of ways in those two professions, if you will. So you have to become a neo-generalist as a farmer. You got livestock, and you got crops, and you got machinery, and you got budgets and banks, and all the above. And the same thing in construction. So I roofed, I laid brick, I carried hod, I wired places and framed places, poured slabs. So indirectly, my father was kind of building the coaching paradigm for me. Be a generalist. When you don't know, ask. Learn from master craftsmen. So he'd always say, look, this guy's our top bricklayer, spend time with him. Or this guy is an excellent cement finisher, learn what he's doing. This guy can roof a building in 2 days, spend time with him. And so I learned to seek expertise and build networks and be a generalist. So I'd say my father, my track coach, and my football coach growing up were huge influences. I did a graduate degree at the University of Houston, where Tom Tellez was my mentor, and he's probably my most powerful sport mentor. I spent 2 years there, and every day was like spending a day with Einstein,
Yeah.
And I've been fortunate. We've stayed in touch ever since, and he's a close friend of the family, and just couldn't say enough about what he taught and what he inferred. And he wasn't a warm, fuzzy guy or here, you need to do this guy. He taught by example.
Right.
And he was a classroom teacher. He was a PE major who taught PE in the Army. But he was a West Coast guy, so it was kind of a weird matrix. But I learned a lot about what I call essentials, like what you absolutely need to know and have to coach. Whether it's programming or biomechanics or communication. He was the first guy that was using the term cues, which falls under the big umbrella of feedback. But I think his PE educational training probably drifted him into that part of pedagogy. And, he was really big into writing cues down that worked, when they worked, with who did they work, what cues didn't work, why might they not have. So he was really influential. And while I was a grad student there, one of my office mates was Victor Lopez, longtime coach at Rice University. And he was from Puerto Rico. He was doing a doctorate, and Victor was a world-class hurdler growing up. He'd had experience with Calvasi and Vittori in Italy. Because he was in the Caribbean, he was friends with the Cubans. So I got a Latin romantic influence on coaching. It was about rhythm and style and freedom and expression, where Coach T was pretty linear, pretty engineering oriented. So I had a pretty cool fusion, if you will, experience there.
Wow. No, that's I'm gonna look Victor up. That's awesome.
Then as I evolved as a coach, like I had some pretty strong, what I would call peer influences, but they ended up, I'd classify them as mentors / peer. Would be Gary Winkler, at the University of Illinois, Lauren Seagrave, who's my boss at LSU, Vern Gambetta, who served on a lot of coaching education committees. So I grew up in a really cool era, if you will, for coach development. It was still teaching based, and almost everybody I knew had classroom experience. And I'm a little biased there, but I don't think there's a better apprenticeship than being a classroom teacher for a year.
Yeah, I'm experiencing that now with the eighth grade. I have a middle school. Well, we have one grade right now, and yeah, it's funny you say that because I'm starting to see that. But so now, like, I mean, the industry now seems to be like there wasn't like a speed coach role probably back when you were there outside of track and field. Like now there's actual like private coaches that are doing speed and how
Well,
do
to be
yeah.
honest, there wasn't even a profession of S&C back then.
Oh, yeah, makes
So
sense.
like I had an interest in it. So my first high school coaching job, I was the strength coach just because I knew something about it.
There's no prerequisite.
And when the NSCA started, because of my work in coaching education, I was asked to write some articles and serve on some panels. So I was there when that organization was, in its infancy, just begging people to be involved.
Interesting.
So, yeah, I've seen quite an evolution in the evolution of a movement coach or a skills coach or a running coach. I would say, maybe 10 years old, if that.
Yeah, and that's amazing. And how do you feel like the industry is now in terms of, because there's everyone is an expert almost, and it's kind of hard to sort through. Like, how do you view the way the industry is going? Do you think it's in a positive direction because more people are entering the industry, or do you feel like it's becoming saturated because of that?
Well, I mean, there's always a saturation point. I guess my concern is the tribalism and the sex sells um, permeation of the industry. There's a lot of garbage out there, a lot of myths, and a lot of people just not really understanding the essentials, the fundamentals, or what to teach, or how to communicate, or how to work on a team. Like, one of the problems in high performance, and this is my bias, I think it has to be a horizontal structure. It can't be top down or siloed.
Mm,
And if you're going to work in a horizontal structure, that means all parties have an equal chair at the table, so to speak, and they communicate, and they're transparent, and they're accountable, and they know how to work in a team. So if you're a speed coach or an S&C coach and you don't understand the demands of the sport or what that athlete's doing in practice with sport specific stuff and how that taxes certain biological factors of the body and whatnot, you're fighting with one arm tied behind your back. So, I see speed coaches, drifting into ice hockey, for example, and, they've never been on skates. They've never played hockey. I grew up in Ohio.
yeah.
They haven't read the literature that's already out there in biomechanics and data collection in hockey. And, they're coming up with, dry land training for hockey players. And, it may have some relevance, but it's not the relevance they're placing upon it. And they're actually doing more harm than good, in my opinion.
Interesting. Yeah.
So I think there's an educational gap there, first of all. And then second of all, I think there's a huge gap on, and this is my complaint with anybody in the performance spectrum. Do you know how to work in a horizontal integrated high performance team?
Yeah. Makes sense.
So like in the NFL, now, everybody complains, if you're a staff S&C member, hey, I only get about 2 weeks out of the year to influence these guys. The rest of the year, it's management and recovery and rehab and whatnot. And they complain, well, the guys are away. I don't know what they're doing or whatnot. Well, get involved, research, find out where there's good places in these various metropolitan areas.
Yeah.
Encourage your guys, if you're going to go home and work in the summer, here are a couple places that we communicate with, that we trust their system. This is all part of learning to work in a horizontal action.
Yeah, that's amazing, which takes a ton of humility to even do.
Well, I think a lot of times, and I don't want to be condescending or judgmental here, but people don't work in integrated teams because they're afraid to be caught out.
Makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, makes sense. How does it for, let's say, like in the NFL, for example, like how would it how the structure work in terms of periodizing speed and getting speed to be integrated into team settings? Like I mean, that's I've never worked in the NFL. I've only done off season and things like that. So it's always been a mystery to guys like me. It's like, how would you integrate it considering their schedule and all that?
Well, I think the first thing you have to do is step back and do an ergonomic analysis of what's happening when they're at OTCs or rookie camp or preseason camp or during the season. And it differs during the season, what you can do the first 6 games versus the middle 6 games versus the end of the season or playoffs. It is night and day. Like I said, in most pro sports, whether it's NFL, NHL, NBA, or whatever, in season, it's really a management paradigm. It's not a development paradigm.
Right.
You're trying to manage energy and recovery and workloads and minor injuries and chronic injuries and sometimes acute injuries. You're reacting to the competition schedule and the coach's schedule during, the days that you do practice. So I think it's important to figure out density patterns when you can try to plug some things in. And when you do plug in, it's with the mindset, I'm going to microdose and nudge. So like if I've got a wide receiver and it's Wednesday and they're working their long passing game or 2-minute drill, this guy's already done 800 excels and long sprints. He's done. And that may be enough for the whole week because you combine Wednesday with the game on Sunday, that may be overtraining. So your job may be maximize recovery techniques.
Makes sense.
A lot of S&C people are married to 3 days a week in the weight room or 4 days a week, 2 upper, 2 lower, so on and so forth. That goes out the window in these kind of leagues.
Right.
But most of these guys, most of the veterans lift maybe twice a week. And one's a tread water day where they do the key lifts, but it's 80 to 90%. They're just ticking over biochemistry and neurologics. And then they'll find another day of the week where they got some time after it, where they might push the window on a few key lifts.
Right.
And that would be dictated by their health, their position. So interior lineman, his push lift might be the bench press, where for a cornerback, his key lift might be single leg deadlifts or something,
Makes sense.
So this is what I mean about studying the ergonomics. What is this guy's task, time of year, his age, things he's battling? So like with COVID, there's been a lot of time test and retest and going to remote meetings and whatnot. So there's a couple hours a day added in with protocol that weren't there in the past. But you got to account for that.
Makes sense.
I've got guys that haven't seen their family since July. I've got to account for that. That's going to influence motivation and arousal and recovery. Everything you do is going to be influenced by that life 101 stressor.
That makes sense. So true. I mean, we're experiencing that now. Like, I got a batch of rookies that are like, man, this is rough. Like, what am I supposed to do? And it's a difficult position for me because sometimes as coaches, like, you want to have the answers. And a lot of times I've been like, I don't know. It's been tough to say, but it's been really hard for those guys adapting. And then, now they're scaling back, like Monday's a day off essentially. They're not in the facility until Tuesday or so. Like it's been tough for a lot of those guys to adjust as rookies, but
well, Well, we do things like we look at their GPS data and, how many runs do you have above a certain threshold? How far did you run at that threshold to see if practice is actually giving us enough stimulus. If we're short on stimulus, I microdose at the end of warm-up. So I got running backs that'll do 3 to 5 really hard 30s at the end of their warm-up on selected days to microdose that. Or, a lot of times I'll have them film. I like to film from head on, side, and behind, and we use it as a movement screen. So they not only get a microdose hit on Accel, but I also get a high-speed movement screen.
Love it.
So this is that management piece that I'm talking about. Where can you microdose and nudge, and the density pattern? Where do you put that in to do no harm or do less harm?
Yeah. Do you think there's? Sorry, go ahead.
We've got a team where they've just been ravaged with injuries and COVID and whatnot. So on special teams, they're going reduce speed and reduce number. Well, 5 or 6 of the guys on the team, that's all they do is special teams. So they're not getting the practice hit they normally would. So now they're getting hamstring injuries because they're not getting vaccinated during the week,
right,
for those high speed runs.
That makes sense. Makes sense. Do you feel like there's a resisted run play within that as well? Like a way to get an acceleration stimulus, a maximal run without exposing them to higher velocities?
Well, you can, but I always refer back to the force velocity curve. And when you put resistance on there, you're going to shift where you're at on that curve.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So, it's kind of a needs basis. If I got a guy that's his virus is spinning, or he struggles with speed, strength, or power expression, then I might microdose some resistant runs at the end of warm-ups.
Got it.
I think a default mistake a lot of people is they try to microdose or nudge at the end of practice. These guys are already tired.
Got it.
That's not my preferred moment to nudge things.
Yeah.
It's early in the workout on a key day.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Yeah. Okay, so I had questions about. I kind of kept it general, but just different zones. Like a hot topic is early acceleration. What are some of the physical attributes you're looking for in early acceleration, and some of the technical? So some of the ways you build out that structure for an athlete.
Well, I'm kind of old school, and I'll default to the essentials. Like we know through research on all kinds of sports, genders, stages of development, stages of career, that there's some big rocks and good accelerators. Each step gets longer and each step gets quicker. There's a unique harmony.
Yeah.
Now, the rate of that change is sport specific or position specific. So a linebacker who takes 5 steps and tackles the guy, that rate of acceleration would be greater than a wide receiver running a long fly pattern.
Right. Right.
Contact times lessen each step, and flight times increase each step. And the attack angle theoretically changes each step because you have less time to apply force each step because you're going faster. So those are the 5 balls or the grid that I'm always looking for. Is each strike getting longer and quicker in a nice harmony? Is the rate of change appropriate for their sport or position?
Yeah.
Is that attack angle changing each step? Is flight time increasing? Is contact time lessening? Now there's variations and there's bandwidths to these things.
Yeah.
And some of them are start posture specific. So am I a wide receiver upright? Am I in a 3-point? Am I a 4-point? How soon is my collision going to occur?
Yeah.
So if I'm a nose guard, I'm probably not going to change my attack angle.
Right. Right.
But those first 3 steps before I engage the guard, you would hope to see each step getting a little longer and a little quicker.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the heuristics are the heuristics.
Yeah. So they have a higher velocity before collision. Yeah. I love it. This is I wanted to show you something actually, if you don't mind.
Yep.
Something like a project that I've been working on. I might have shown Stu already. So this is just a way, because like, you know, going through everything you and Stu have talked about, and Jonas, like I was trying to put some numbers to it. So for example, like we're looking at early acceleration, we're looking at what is your acceleration in 0.5 seconds, like in that first push, like how much of that, how much of a horizontal acceleration can you create, how much horizontal force can you create in that amount of time. So we put together, this is somewhat force velocity, but somewhat just looking at acceleration data. But I wanted to get your thoughts, and this is like off the grid. Like we don't have to show this to anyone, but here we go. So we're using GPS units right now. So we're collecting data. We have a couple of teams that send us data, and a couple of athletes we have in person. This is actually one of our high school athletes that is incredible athlete. He runs 10.2 meters per second. He's 16 years old, with relatively like no training. Like he's been in our program a year, but not a ton of training. But what we're able to look at is their peak velocities, and then our horizontal ratio of force metric, which gives us their ratio of force at 0.5 seconds. So like how much of what acceleration are they at in 0.5 seconds? Their power, their DRF is just, you know, how much they're decreasing every meter per second. And then we added on relative accel, so like their peak velocity divided by their peak accel, and then their max accel. So it's just some metrics that we've been looking at, but we're trying to find, where I'm at right now is I'm trying to find value in it and trying to see, like, can it really show what I'm trying to show? I think that's where I'm at right now, especially with the metrics like the max accel and looking at like the peak acceleration point.
Well, well, I think it's a little bit like HRV or force platform data or whatnot. You collect norms over time.
Yeah.
But realize there's ways to game the system. So like Matt Jordan, a good friend of ours in Calgary, does a lot of force platform research on return to play with skiers.
Mm-hmm.
And they have all these different jump tests they do on a regular basis as part of their workout. So they got data when these guys are healthy, when they're injured, post-surgery, 6 months, 18 months, whatever. They got the data. Mm-hmm. But what he was finding is the force platform data kept giving him error signals on what the athlete was reporting, what they were seeing in their sport, so on and so forth. So I suggested adding another layer, video kinematics. So film from side, front, rear, and above.
Yeah.
And what we're finding, these guys cheated. They would distort the body or compensate and give you nice force platform data.
Yeah.
But it really wasn't functional or healthy, if you will.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
So what Matt eventually discovered is what he calls a zigzag theory on return to play on tendon surgeries. Mm-hmm. So the athlete will start out compensating on one leg a lot post-op, but then around 6 to 8 months, they start over-emphasizing the injured leg. It's kind of a false confidence, or, hey, I got to check this out or whatever. It's not conscious. But then it starts shifting back to compensation, and this zigzag continues up to about 2 years.
Yeah.
So the danger of what I call a small snapshot, it's kind of like a blood test. It's telling you what's going on that day with that individual over these exact parameters.
Yeah.
I would caution, against the Charlie Francis mistake. When Charlie came out with all those split times, like 10, 20, 30, 40, everybody started chasing from the front end. Like playing around with the blocks and their drive angles and all of this to get a 10 in the zone they wanted to be, and then figuring out ways to get to 20 with still having a good 10 and all that. So they built a race from the front end.
Makes sense.
And that worked up to about 40 or 50 meters. But then these guys would fall apart late in the race,
right,
because they'd totally ignored that section of the race from a training standpoint.
Right.
So this data here, I could game this with a lower attack angle or a longer push on my initial drive leg.
Yep.
And it would give me X.
Right.
Now I could change my attack angle 5 degrees and push in a shorter period of time. It would give me Y.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if my sport task is to hit great metrics at 5 yards or 10 yards, then it's got way more value.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if I'm a wide receiver or a track sprinter or a point guard where I got to run the court, this may be fool's gold.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Or?
Yeah, because you need context, and yeah, it makes sense. 100%. No, and I appreciate that. We just been kind of going through it and looking.
No, I think it's valuable, and I would build out layers of this and look at norms like time of year, class the kid is in school, his sport, his position. I think all that stuff is super critical and valuable
in the community about early acceleration. But what are some KPIs for late acceleration? Because it seems to be a little bit more of a skill to have a good late acceleration and be able to transition through velocity. What are some things that you've coached through the years and seen with athletes?
Yeah, well, the term transition is kind of an ambiguous term, and it's debated, and it's like, where do you sit in what tribal camp and whatnot? Like Stu has a saying, the entire race at 100 meters is transition. You're transitioning from step to step.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, classically in the literature, especially European literature, transition is a zone where the athlete, when the acceleration numbers start stagnating, if you will, until the athlete hits top upright speed, that zone is what they call the transition zone, if you will. So my comment is, if we use that definition, I think we got to look at the kinematics in the kinetics, in that zone.
Yep.
So some guys will accelerate and start hitting some constant numbers at step 6 or 8.
Yeah.
An experienced track guy or wide receiver, if you're telling him he's going longer, they won't hit that till step 12.
Right.
So it's kind of sport specific or skill development or bias in their training or bias on how they look at the run. So like we know, if we tell a wide receiver, we're doing a 20-meter test or 20-yard test and a 40, it's 2 different sets of data.
Yeah. They're going to run completely different. It's like when I made that mistake with combine training where like in the beginning I had guys like racing to 10 and like they eventually got like some fast times. This is probably like 2016. And then we pushed it out to 20 and their 20s all got like, they were terrible because they were just spinning, take 7-8 steps in that 10. So yeah, context for sure. That makes a lot of sense.
Well, that's what I was referring to on your spreadsheet page. Yep. So it's a valid snapshot of what's happening for that test.
Yeah. Well, one thing we're doing is we're not testing anymore. So we're collecting this data in training. So we're doing like a warm up, and then they're doing a couple of 10s or 20s or 30s, and then some of the data is actually coming from practice data. So some of the data is like we take the peak acceleration and the peak velocity run, the one that had the best combination, and then we'll profile it. So we're seeing how much power they're producing like over time. So and what we'll do is collect 2 weeks of data and say, okay, within this 2-week period, like here's kind of the norm, like here's what we see with this athlete, and then work backwards from a physical standpoint. And then, the kinematic side, like looking at, is there something going on this front that's influencing how much power this athlete can produce or can't produce?
Yeah.
But it's just something I've been playing around with. And
No, I think that's all valuable. And, I think you got to look at these different sections too. Everybody's caught up in power the first 10 meters, but what's your power output at 40?
Right. Yep. No, it's huge. It's huge. I had one other question on that. So, for max velocity, so like how much, the biggest thing is like a lot of teams say like, oh, we don't want to do max velocity. Like, how important is max velocity training to team sport athletes, and like what are some ways you can train it without exposing them to any risks?
Well, I'm a big believer that you got to vaccinate people for what they're about to encounter. So if you do all your runs at 80 to 90, and then in a game 5 or 6 times they have to get up above 90, are they tolerant?
Yeah, probably not.
So for some kids, they may get it in practice, but like there's a safety for Carolina that I've been helping with return to play, and he's never been above 18.5 in practice the whole season.
Mm-hmm.
But in the game, consistently, he'll have 8 or 9 plays where he's in the high 20s.
Right.
And he keeps getting hamstring niggles. The gap's too big there.
Makes sense.
Now, I've got a running back who is hitting 20 probably 10 to 15 times during the practice week. And that's what he hits in the game. So he's prepared for it.
Right. Makes sense. Makes a ton of sense.
So there's a couple of ways. So like what I tell some of my skill guys is on Wednesday, while you're fresh, early in the practice, run out 3 or 4 of your plays. Run it out to 40 yards or 50 yards.
Mm-hmm.
Get that hit, get that vaccination. Mm-hmm. Some teams, they have what they call Fast Friday, where they really go hard and fast, but it's real short, condensed. Yeah. Right. That's another window where you could microdose some speed runs.
Right.
Now, I personally, unless they're on drugs, I think most guys can only handle 6 to 8 speed runs in the off season in a session.
Okay. And at 6 to 8, like hitting their close to their peak velocity.
Yeah. And things I use to judge that are the kinematics. Are they in their safe bandwidth kinematically?
Yeah.
What does the metric output say? And, even at that, these are pretty long rests, which football guys, basketball guys, field hockey girls, they don't like to use long rest. But, I'm always on them. We need this rest in order to sustain the mechanics and to sustain the output numbers. Right. If we go quicker than that, something's going to pay.
Right. Makes sense.
So then with that idea, and we've tested this out in numerous sports, we feel that 3 to 5 efforts at least twice a week with a once a week game format to be the basement level of vaccine.
Love it.
So with your Greyhound guys, they just need a touch up. So they could probably get by with 3 speed runs, maybe once a week or twice a week.
Yeah.
But your hybrids, the guys that are kind of powerful in musculature, we find they need more of the ceiling, kind of like 5 runs twice a week.
Yeah.
To vaccinate them. And this has been done with epidemiological data. So we look at how many runs did they get in our zone, and then how did that affect injury output or chronicity of injury?
Yeah, makes sense. And is there a distance they're given, or is it more so just like reach your peak velocity? Maybe
Well,
10 times a
that's
week?
a good question. I and this is why I'm big on knowing your people's averages. So when you're doing speed workouts in the off season, what is their high velocity speed average? To me, that's kind of the threshold
Yeah,
bar you want to try to touch
yeah,
in those microdoses.
got it, got it. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and one thing that, again, like off the record, I'd want to hear your thoughts on is like what I'm building or trying to build from a technology standpoint is taking the GPS data and saying, how did you reach that velocity? So say, okay, you hit 20, but how do we reach it? With what power, with what velocity, with what rate of decrease in acceleration? Did your acceleration start really high and then drop really low? Or did you hit it early? Or are you hitting it late? Like that, those are kind of the things I'm really looking. That's where I want my research. Eventually I told you I want to get my PhD. And that's kind of where I want to focus is how you get to that velocity. And
Yeah, and I think another metric might be, okay, once you were able to reach that average,
mm,
could you hold on to it?
yeah, yeah,
So you not only want to look at the decay of the acceleration capabilities and how it fed the output, but once you hit that output, what's the rate of decay there?
yeah. And do you think that's a technical, like that's what, oh my God, I've been going through it so many times and
I
practice.
think it's twofold. I think it's technical. Most guys, when they fatigue or once they hit that zone, if they haven't been exposed to holding on to it, they don't know what to monitor or fix.
Mm, yeah,
So you see this all the time indoors. Like in the UK, every year they got 10 guys under 665 for the 60. But then outdoors, they have maybe one under 10. Well, that doesn't work.
right.
Well, it's because you can get away with all kinds of shit to 60, but
Mm,
to hold on to it and have a very little decay, you got to know how to fix things.
right, right.
And most of the time, the decay comes from a reduction in air time, so they don't have time to reposition the limb.
Yeah,
And that reduction in air time comes from a bias to going back to horizontal driver. Like if they're fatiguing or unsure, they push horizontally to get out of jail
they're trying to continue to accelerate. Yeah, makes sense.
or re-accelerate, if you will.
Reaccelerate. So where would that, um, and that's something like we've been doing a ton of like looking at and playing around, even using the wickets. It's like got the ground contacts pretty good, got them even, got the air times good. And at a certain point, some athletes will hit this point where they're physically not capable of producing that ground time and air time and that length. Like what are some ways to kind of improve that? Like we're looking at that with our combine athletes. Like what's some ways to improve that?
Well, I think you identify the zone where this is happening. It might be a 5-yard zone or a 10-yard zone. And then you experiment with cues for the solution.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not, if they hit high speed and the rate of decay is massive the next 10 yards, that's not metabolic.
Mm.
You don't hit a metabolic wall in sprinting.
Right. Makes sense.
Now, there may be a metabolic transport issue, but even that's a pretty big reach in my experience.
Right.
Generally, the driver of error is not knowing what to do mechanically to fix the bias that they have when they hit that panic moment or that feeling.
Makes sense. One thing, like one cue we've been kind of looking at, and I'm sure you and Stu have talked about this a lot, but trying to create more proximal cueing for max velocity, or even just sprinting in general, and just simplify to around like the lumbo-pelvic area, the hip region. Like, what are some things or cues? Like, is that your belief, or is there more? Should you be thinking about your ankle or your foot or positioning from that standpoint, or like where would the athlete take their mind to focus on?
Well, I think that if you're paying attention, you can mailbox your athletes. Like, are they hip aware people? Are they thigh aware people? Are they shank aware people? Are they foot aware people? Are they spatially aware people? Like, can they feel where their appendages are in space? Or are they rhythm aware people? You know, in awareness, there's two mailboxes, spatial and temporal. And I learned the hard way through Victor. A lot of Caribbean kids are rhythm biased, rhythm driven. And if you're using spatial cues, that's like speaking Greek to them.
Got it. It might make them worse. Yeah.
Well, my wife danced with me once in my entire life, and that was our wedding dance. And she said, never again. Because, and I can't play golf either, because I know all the positions, the angles, but I can't hear music. I don't hear beats like people.
Makes sense.
And it's hard to learn dance if you don't understand rhythm.
Right.
So if I've got a rhythm guy, say I got a Greyhound rhythm guy, and I'm talking to him about hip lock and dorsiflexion, it's masturbation.
It's so true. Yeah. I think the biggest issue is like coming on as an early coach is like you figure something out and you put everybody into that box. And I've probably done that like 10 times. I mean, I continue to do it now, and it's always like the same.
Well, I mean, it's part of the job. We've got to mailbox ideas and concepts to create order, to avoid chaos.
Right.
So I think it's great to have mailboxes, but you got to have layers of mailboxes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like on proximal and distal, like some of it's driven by where is the air and kinesthetically, how do they note feedback? And so if I've got a foot person and they're over pushing, I'm going to use like cues like, as soon as you feel the ground, get off. Don't spend any time there.
Yeah.
If I've got a center of mass aware person, like they know where their core is and their pelvis is, I might use a cue like, as soon as you feel that foot underneath you, get off.
Yeah.
If I've got a grinder, you know, the mesomorph that's overdeveloped in the gym, that overcooks things horizontally, that just every answer is power out.
Yeah.
I might use a cue like, I want you to bounce when you hit the ground. You're not allowed to grind. You can just bounce. That's it.
Right. Yeah, that's me. No, that's so good.
Most rugby guys are grinders. You know, I do a lot of work with rugby and AFL football, and the number one cancer in rugby is guys over push horizontally. They don't know how to transition from a horizontal driver and bias to a more vertical driver and bias. They're just that's a foreign language to them.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. I got one last question. I know you gotta go. My baby just got back too. If you had a group, like, I mean, NFL Combine is kind of like it's my fun time where I get to like test things out and really prove things. If you had a group of guys for the NFL Combine now, like, how would you approach that 8-week period? It's such a short window. How would you approach it?
Well, that's a great question. The first trap I see people getting into is they coach to the combine.
Yeah.
Well, what you do at the combine or a simulated combine and what you do on pro day are two different things. And then what, if you make it as a free agent or a late draft pick, what you do in OTAs and rookie camp is a different thing. So my first step back is, does this guy have a shot? Yes. Okay. I've got to prep him for the combine, for pro day and OTA. I got to juggle those three balls.
Yeah.
So I can't get too biased.
Makes
sense. Now, I may have days of the week that are more combine driven, days of the week that are more OTA driven, days of the week that might be more player pro day drip. So I'll give you an example. I had a wide receiver at Texas A&M who was free agent level.
Mm-hmm.
Caught passes for a first round quarterback, ran probably 30 routes. Couple of the scouts liked what they saw, asked him to run some more routes with another quarterback. The guy ran 62 routes that day.
Wow. Wow. Yeah.
And luckily he was an endurance hound, and we'd kind of prepped, we kind of figured this might happen. And he ended up getting drafted in the 7th round, and he's now year 5 in the league. But if he hadn't been prepared for that pro day, he would have never got the look.
Yeah. No, and that's so funny saying that, because my first combine group, I treated it like it was the Olympics. Like it was just a track meet and that was it. Like, and the guys did really well, ran fast, got to rookie minicamp, and they called me, like, I'm tired. Like we did one day and I'm tired. And that's something we've been trying to incorporate. It's just get them ready, like long term. And even like really looking at every time I get a guy now, it's like, through your first contract, here's the map. You know, here's your windows, here's your map, here's what we're doing year to year. We're starting with this phase of development and then growing to this phase, and then come to year 3. Now we're adding on layers to that. But that's super helpful. From a volume standpoint, like would you do 2 speed days, 3 speed days? Like what kind of format would you do for that?
Yeah, I mean, generally I'm a big believer in combine to do, 2 pretty good solid acceleration days and 1 speed day if possible.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that may be a hybrid. Like I may do a Excel speed hybrid, if I'm really jammed in the week.
Yeah. Makes
And
sense.
some of it's analyzing the tests. It's like, if this guy's a bad jumper or a bad change in direction guy, I've got to have more of those hits in the week. So I may have to compromise some stuff.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense.
Like with McCaffrey, we knew he wasn't going to be a big bench presser. And so we just got where he could do 12, and we lived with that because we knew his other tests were going to blow that away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Which he did. Yeah. And like, I mean, I remember reading Stu's work in the beginning where he was doing a medium day before the hard day to start the week. And I was trying, it was just hard in terms of priority for combine. Like I know you and Stu kind of have 2 different formats in terms of how you look at it from that standpoint. Like Stu's had the medium and then potentiation day. Like have you gone to that format, or are you still doing like acceleration? Okay, yep, makes sense.
And I just think that there's a specificity of their position or their needs.
Yeah.
So I've had guys where I've done 3 Excel workouts because they were so raw and so inconsistent that, if they couldn't excel consistently, all their tests were going to be off.
Right.
Except
right.
for the jump test.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I did 3 days a week Excel. I made the middle one an Excel speed hybrid, so that we vaccinated it and worked on issues there.
Yeah.
But that was the driver, was we got to get this Excel nailed.
Yeah. No, for sure. For sure. Well, my daughter's waking up now. I really appreciate your time. Like this is a dream come true. This is awesome.
Well, let's do it again.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely got more questions. I didn't want to overdo it, but I want to show you what I'm working on from the acceleration side. And the cool thing is, like, we're looking at a lot of practice data, and we're seeing like where their peak excels lag compared to where they were when they tested. So just like really cool things, and I wanted to get your feedback on it. So
all right, well, I'm pretty free next week with the holiday and all of that. So if you get a window, just drop me a line and we'll do it again.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, cool, perfect, my man. Thank you so much again, and I'll send this to you as well. I recorded it.
All right. Sounds good.
All right, thank you. Bye.
Stay safe.